Hi, present and future educators. I named this video Bulletproof Blueprint. What it is really a to-do list for you, which is in the right order for preparing a lecture from scratch without being overwhelmed of the huge task ahead. Number 1, define the learning goals. I have a video about didactics and the impact of learning goals and why this is important when you teach according to constructive alignment. Also, I explain in this video what this is. No matter what you know about the didactics behind, it's important to start with the learning goals. Sometimes you have the chance to make a lecture module teaching unit from scratch and offer it to students at your university or institution. And that means that you have to define the learning goal yourself. Sometimes you step in to take over teaching that is already established, and then usually the learning goals are already defined in the module handbook that the university has set up. For beginner lecturers, check out the Bloom's pyramid. You get action verbs, and these help you to define the learning goals. Orient yourself in the lower areas, because we have to build a foundation first when we teach, and then we can elevate this on the higher levels of the tip of the pyramid, which would be then analysis, and the tip would be creation. Beginner level studies should focus on the lower levels of the Bloom's pyramid. It's good to have something centered around remembering and understanding. So that means recalling facts and also explaining ideas. It's on a relatively low cognitive level. And when we then go to the intermediate studies, we aim to apply the gained knowledge with scenarios and more complex discussions. And also we want to analyze, so we want to break down certain aspects with the understanding and remembering, which we learned first, we can now analyze and we can apply. For advanced studies, it is then time to go into the higher orders of cognitive skills, like evaluating, that means making judgments, and creating, that means assembling new ideas or producing original work. So number 1 is defining the learning goals. And I can also make a separate video on that if that is something that you wish to see. Let me know in the comments. Second, we will prepare the exam questions. Why is that? Again, I refer to the triangle of constructive alignment, where we align the learning goals, which we have just defined, step 1. And then the teaching is aligned with the learning goal and the assessment, which is the exams. It is always helpful to make the exam questions right in the beginning, because that defines what you want to teach. So you do not waste time making lecture slides, PowerPoint presentation, this and that, if it's not 100% aligned with the learning goal and the assessment. Now that you have the learning goals and a rough outline of the exam questions, it's not the final exam, it's a rough outline, and it gives you an idea, and you will come back to that at the end to fine-tune, let's say. So now that you have the learning goals and the exam questions, it's time to make the PowerPoint presentation. Most of the time it's a PowerPoint presentation nowadays. How do you do that? You make a plan about this lecture first. So you divide your session into sections, and I will put this on the screen. I recommend to have 2 or 3 learning goals per session. And that takes into consideration now learning units of 90 minutes, ideal for 2 or 3 learning goals. If you have 45 minutes, you can have 2 learning goals. Why is this important that you divide the teaching unit into sections first before you make the PowerPoints? Well, because it helps you to know how much content you have to deliver in this section. So it saves you time in the end if you do this first. If we stick now with a 90-minute teaching unit, which is quite common around here, then let's focus on the 2 learning goal session. In my schematic here, again, it's a schematic, it's an initial scheme. It's not 100% fixed to the timing. It gives you an orientation, what you have to work with. 5 minutes you take away for the start and the end. And I have a whole separate video on how to start and end a lecture, where I share how I do that and what my experiences are. So 5 minutes starting the lecture, it's about audience activation, and the end to wrap up to discuss the study task or individual learning and also final questions. Then in a 90-minute scenario, if you take away 5 minutes and 5 minutes, you have 80 minutes left. These 80 minutes you can divide now into 2 parts when you have 2 learning goals. And that leaves you with roughly 40 minutes per learning goal. What do you do with this 40 minutes? You separate it again into a 30-minute input section and a 10-minute reflection phase. And the reflection phase is where the learning is solidified, where you make the students speak, draw, and write. Check out my video where I talk about how to teach critical thinking. Then it's to make the students talk, draw, and write. And this reflection phase is the phase where you can actively do that in every lecture. Although it's a lecture, you can do that. So now what remains is, per learning goal, you have 30 minutes. What do you do with these 30 minutes? As a rule of thumb, I have for myself figured out that when I give a scientific talk, I have about 1 slide per minute. That's how I prepare it. If I am invited for a 10-minute talk, I would have 10 slides, including the first and the last slide. And if I'm doing teaching, then this is only a quarter of the ratio. So I would have about 1 slide for every 4 minutes. That's why if I have a 30-minute time slot, I work with 10 PowerPoint slides. To have a lively, engaging lecture and to solidify knowledge and to intensify the learning experience, it is good to have also medium change. So with those PowerPoint presentations, it is easy that you just talk and talk and talk as a lecturer, and then you know how it is yourself when you have been in an audience. You switch off at some point, just listening, or you take notes and you lose track. So what is really important is to switch the scenery. I'm just standing here and talking, so you really have to want to listen and watch this video. Yeah, just standing here in front of a blank canvas and talking can be very hard on students, and it's not ideal for the learning. That's why 10 slides only. And the content of these slides, anyhow, is not something that you just repeat, because why should a student come to your lecture? They come to see and hear you explain and frame it so that they can learn the content better, because otherwise they could just go to the internet and watch a video, or they could go to a textbook and just read about it. So what I'm doing is I'm using the whiteboard and the blackboard heavily, and that takes up half of the time. So basically for 30 minutes, I'm talking 10-15 minutes with the slides, and then I might switch in between or at the end. It depends really on the content. There is no rule for that. And then you switch to the whiteboard and you draw it and bring this all into a context that is digestible. In addition, you have pictures, you have movies, you have all types of different materials that can help to transfer the information. So that's it. That's the planning of the lecture. Now coming to the whiteboard, blackboard. So especially for beginners, sometimes you admire how people do that, right? You see online, you see experienced professors, or when you're really interested in the topic, you watch a video and you are amazed when they drop on the whiteboard, the blackboard, and you think, oh wow, these are amazing people. And yes, most of the time they are amazing people, but never forget they started like you started. And how do you start? When you are a beginner, you have notes. And what do you do when you start to teach a course and you know that you have to put something on the blackboard? You better have also notes there. So the next bullet point on the bulletproof blueprint checklist is prepare the whiteboard, blackboard schematics. And that has 2 reasons. First of all, it makes you secure in how you put it down and what this will look like. And second, it shouldn't be a scribble scrabble all over the place. This is not about handwriting or style. It's about being structured so that it serves the greater purpose, which is reaching the learning goal, understanding the matter. So now that you have prepared all of that, you can go back to the exam questions and you can check if you have included everything, and you can fine-tune those. The next step is to be sure that you have everything prepared before the lecture starts, because ideally you provide the students with a PowerPoint slide so that they can take notes without being distracted and without having to take too many notes. Oftentimes for undergraduate studies, I make a script. So that would be the next point on the to-do list. What is a script? It's basically what I intend to say to my lecture slides in full sentences with bold print, highlighted the keyword. Why do I do this? If you just recommend a book, that's fine. It depends totally on the textbook. If we have these huge textbooks with 1,000 pages, not 1,000 pages, but many hundred pages. The question is sometimes, is it worth the deep learning phase time to read through all of this text, which sometimes distracts from the core principles that you want to convey in undergraduate courses? So that's why I'm curious what your opinion about this is, but that's why I started to make scripts. So that means students can have a look into the textbook with getting more information, but they also can just rely on the materials provided, and those are sufficient to reach the learning goals and to pass the exam. I find them very helpful myself. There's a second layer of why I think this is helpful. If you are a beginner teacher in a certain topic, it's helpful to not only make the PowerPoint slides, which often have bullet points and the key aspects and a representative image, and you have maybe your notes section. It is helpful for yourself to have a little teaching booklet, which is the script basically. So you know how you would put it in context, say it, how are your transitions, how is everything connected, and does the order of how you put things make sense. For this reason, it's very helpful to make a script. In summary, learning goal lists, exam questions, rough outline, making the PowerPoint slides with the help of sectioning the learning unit for input and reflection, start and end, learning goals 2 or 3, knowing how many slides to fill, making the slides and then writing the script or going back to the exam questions to check if this is all in line. One additional last thing, it is good to have a self-test or with something that they can do after each learning unit, which is directly connected to this learning unit. And what it is basically a Word document where you have 2, 3, 4 questions, which are similar to exam questions, but a little less complex, I would say. And they can be used by the students to check what knowledge is already sticking and what do I have to work on a little harder for preparation of the exam. That's it. That's how I plan the lecture, and I'm looking forward to your responses. If this is something you also do, would you find this helpful? Do you find it too complicated? Maybe you say, well, not doing it like that. I have good experience like this and that. I'm curious to learn what your opinion is, what you experienced. Maybe you're an advanced educator and you say, I tested this and this doesn't work, but this is in my hand good. I'm especially interested in undergraduate students and their education because I think that's where you set the foundation and where it's especially important to guide them from a rigid school system to a university learning experience where a student also has to develop the how to learn skills themselves. Thanks for listening and happy teaching.